Ted is an absolutely marvellous man. He's a man of tremendous convictions.
This man had stories about everything, everything.
We sort of foresaw a career for Ted that he would peacefully retire at the age of 75.
I can remember he's going to be 94 on July the 20th, 2007. And I can remember about 5 years ago, he said, you know, I'm just not doing enough. And I said, well, how many hours did you work last week? Well, I don't know. I was on the road probably about 80 hours or 90 hours.
My kids absolutely adored him. He told a lot of jokes, mind you. Some of them were repeats, what we listened anyway.
He used to drive a little Chevette, and such a tall man getting out of the little Chevette was kind of humorous.
He's a tremendous example to everybody because of his strength in standing up to all of the things that are happening in society which we would consider to be evil and bad for families.
For Ted, the priesthood was the most incredible gift that any human being could be given, and he cherishes his priesthood and he gives thanks to God for it, and anything connected with the priesthood is sacred to him.
Ireland, a land of bards and poets, of shamrocks and leprechauns, of River Liffey, O'Connell Street, Molly Malone, and of course the great St. Patrick. Edward Colleton was born in Dublin, Ireland on July 20th, 1913.
My mother was there at the time, so I wanted to be with her.
His father was a Catholic businessman. His mother, a Dublin belle, was bright, vivacious, and articulate.
Well, a number of members of his family. I met both of his late sisters and one brother-in-law at least, and nieces and nephews and whatnot. And they were just a fine Irish family. And he was very proud of them all. He was very proud of his father and mother, and spoke so highly of the religious fervor of his family, so much so that it laid the foundation for his own faith.
In his book, Yes, I'd Do It Again, he says, I found myself equally at home in comedy, tragedy, and Gilbert and Sullivan musicals. So much so that in my last year at high school, I felt myself being pulled in opposite directions. Should I become an actor or a priest? So after much prayer and discerning at age 19, Edward Colleton entered the Holy Ghost Novitiate and on June 23, 1940, was ordained a priest.
And I was preaching my first sermon, and I needn't tell you I was very nervous, but there was a young mother in the front seat with a baby, a big kind of a baby, and the baby took a dislike to me. Now, the child hadn't come to the use of reason, but I'd say something and the kid would yell, and I'd stop and the kid would stop, and I'd go on, the kid would scream, and I'd stop and the kid would stop, and I'd go on, the kid would scream again. So she got up to take him out. I said, don't take him out, he's not annoying me. She said, no, but you're annoying him.
For Ted, the priesthood was the most incredible gift that any human being could be given, and he cherishes his priesthood, and he gives thanks to God for it, and anything connected with the priesthood is sacred to him. The Eucharist, the divine office, celibacy, these things that are connected with ordination are very, very sacred to Ted, and nothing is going to change that.
And the greatest compliment you can give to him is when you call him Father. I don't think there's anything else out there that he would find as not flattering, as warm and positive as when you address Father Ted Colleton as Father.
In 1941, he was assigned to Kenya, East Africa as a missionary. The Second World War was raging, and the Mediterranean was blocked, so he sailed with hundreds of others in convoys of 14 ships at 8 knots, about the speed of a donkey and a cart, he says. He arrived a few days before Christmas, 1942, in Durban, South Africa, attending midnight mass, listening to the hymn Silent Night. Tears welled up in his eyes.
We all knew in Ireland, 10,000 miles away, of Ted Colleton in Kenya. One of the things that was known about him, of course, was that he was a tremendous linguist, and he had learned Kiswahili better than any of his colleagues or predecessors had, and he spoke it far better than any of the colonial officers. So that meant Kiswahili is the lingua franca of East Africa, so that meant Ted could talk to anyone from Mombasa up to Zanzibar. And knowing Ted, he probably did.
A couple of days after Christmas, my younger brother had been in Japan and sang us Silent Night in Japanese. And then Father Ted followed with singing Silent Night in Kiswahili.
The mission fields can take its toll on the best of men. Through his genuine love of the Kenyan people and his zeal for his mission, Father held his own under adverse physical, spiritual, and political conditions.
I remember his talk to us in the seminary, and he told us a story about going into a village where he was called on a sick call and being sort of delayed at the entrance to the village. And eventually, after about a half an hour, he went in. And when he went into the village, he realized there were lots of people there who were not local Kikuyus. He didn't recognize their faces. And a local headmaster called Jomo Kenyatta was there too, with a lot of people around him. And Ted told us that story and said, I don't know what it was, but he said there was something going on. You know, within 2 or 3 years, we had heard of the Mau Mau and we had heard of Jomo. And obviously what was happening there was a note-taking ceremony, because the Mau Mau were a secret oath-bound society. As we only discovered later, he was asked to act as a chaplain in one of the biggest internment camps when the Mau Maus finally came out from the bush and surrendered to the British. And through that, Jomo got to know nearly all the leaders of what was going to be the independent, modern Kenya, including Jomo Kenyatta. 20 years later, as I say, he crossed swords with Jomo, who he felt was getting increasingly racist.
Father Ted, on a matter of principle, wrote to Kenyan President Jomo Kenyatta, defending Christian missionaries, and after 30 years as a missionary in Africa, was subsequently expelled from the country.
So he came to Canada. We had just set up an organization called VIX.
While we were out at Mary Lake, he met Claire Calabresa and our son George, and after that there was a meeting set up, and so started the resale stores for VIX.
Which was to send lay missionaries to our missions. And who better man than Ted to go around Canada telling his stories, doing his card tricks, doing his magic, and talking about Africa and the missions.
Well, I think so many people have been thanked tonight that I wouldn't go over it all again, but I want to thank you all for coming and welcome you all, and I'd like to particularly welcome our dear guests, our very dear guests at $50 a head.
Father Ted's humorous outlook on life, friendly personality, card tricks, jokes, and zeal for souls helped him forge many relationships in Canada that would prove to last a lifetime.
I've known Father Ted Colleton since he first arrived in Canada. I met him at a function at Neil McNeil High School, and he introduced himself as one of Father Jack Shepherd's classmates. So I've known him and worked with him in the pro-life movement for most of his time here in Canada. And it's been a tremendous experience, actually. His house was at the end of the road there where I live, and I would frequently come home to find him sitting on the floor in the living room with my kids doing card tricks or coin tricks or whatever.
I remember on several occasions being asleep or supposed to be asleep up in bed and hearing his voice, and I would sneak down with a deck of cards and hop onto his lap and beg him to show me a few card tricks, which always turned into many card tricks. I think I only remember him showing me the secrets of one card trick.
My kids absolutely adored him. He told a lot of jokes, mind you. Some of them were repeats, but we listened anyway. And the card tricks, they loved them. I had one little grandson, he was only 4 at the time, and he made him do one trick, I think about 10 times. He wanted to learn to do that trick. He said, please show me how you did the trick.
I remember 37 years since he's been here. A friend brought him to see me. He said, you've got to meet Peggy. And he came in and said, both my sisters were nuns, so that was a great opening thing. I was okay if I had 2 sisters who were nuns, and what order they were, then I was able to tell him all this. And he did nothing. Well, actually, he came in, he asked for a cup of tea. I mean, he didn't even wait for me to offer him a cup of tea. He asked for a cup of tea. And then he took over completely, and I'll tell you a few stories. Would you like to hear a good story? And of course, I didn't know him. I said, I'd love to hear. Well, he didn't stop. He went from one story to another story, and then I would mention something about something, and he would say, a great story on that. This man had stories about everything, everything.
When the Holy Father was in Ireland some years ago, he was visiting some of the homes of people who were old people or people who were debilitated or something. And he was going to one of the homes run by the Sisters of Charity. And the Reverend Mother was showing him around. They went into one room and there were 3 men there, one over here and one over here and one over here. He said, Holy Father, this is Tom and this is Pat and this is Mike. Now, she said, poor Tom has been blind for the last 20 years. So the Pope just went over, rubbed his hand over Tom's eyes, and Tom leaped up. He said, I can see, I can see. And then she said, and this is poor Pat. And Pat had an accident about 6 months ago, and in motor accident, he can't walk. His knees are broken. The Pope just touched his knees, and he leaped up and said, I'm cured, I can walk. And she said, this is Mike. And Mike was working for a building firm, and about 6 months ago, he was building a house, and he fell off the wall and broke his back. The Pope was just going up. Mike said, don't lay a finger on me, I'm on workman's compensation.
He would stop in as he came down the street at night saying the beads, and stop in and have a cup of tea or whatever. And so we developed a very close bond. But the stronger bond, of course, was forged as a result of the pro-life work that we did together.
Father Ted's demeanor and solid Catholic faith proved to be advantageous in working with the pro-life movement. Soon after coming to Canada, he worked as a volunteer for Birthright, then began visiting schools with Toronto Right to Life, and soon after joined Campaign Life Coalition and the Interim newspaper as a regular columnist.
I find editing Father Ted's columns an interesting challenge. He has a unique solution to punctuation problems. He puts in an exclamation mark. When he's really baffled, he puts in 10. Now, we tried to keep Father Ted out of the office, but at one time we used to let him come to our editorial meetings. But he kept falling asleep, and he snores. And that used to wake up Father DeVault.
His articles in the Interim, his columns were just absolutely tremendous in this pro-life newspaper, the Interim. And people all over the country would tell me how they had read something that Father Ted had said and were using it themselves in something they were writing, or pastors saying that they had used part of it in their Sunday homilies or sermons and that sort of thing.
He was tireless in his efforts. He joined the Knights of Columbus, the Legion of Mary, and Priests for Life. He regularly spoke in parishes, conducted missions and retreats, led pilgrimages, attended and delivered speeches at pro-life conferences and meetings, and raised over $1 million in the sales of his books.
He didn't think that he had a book in him, but we started off, I believe, with his columns from the interim newspaper. And then he wrote a book about the priesthood, about his life, Yes, I Do It Again. And I met with the then head of the Spiritans in Toronto, and we had lunch together, and I offered him the book. The priest chuckled and said, well, we got enough money. He wants it to go to Campaign Life Coalition. He wants it to go to the pro-life work, so by all means print the book and distribute it as widely as you can.
We sort of foresaw a career for Ted, that he would do this for a couple of years and then maybe become a chaplain to a convent and peacefully retire at the age of 75. Little did we know that he was going to have a career in Canada that was longer and more fruitful, I would say, than any career he ever had in Africa.
He celebrated masses, led rosary walks, picketed obituaries, did interviews, and generally set a torrid pace for himself and wouldn't stop except to pray. Now, all of this was not without its challenges. Father Ted was arrested in December 1985 for padlocking the gates at the Morgentaler Abortuary and spent 6 weeks in jail.
Good evening and welcome to Conversations. I'm Carl Sapkowski. Conversations is a public affairs presentation of Lake Superior Cablevision. A recent visitor to our community is the Reverend Ted Colleton of the Holy Ghost Fathers. He was here in Sault Ste. Marie on a speaking engagement on the controversial issue in Canada, certainly, and more so even in our province, of abortion. And Father, I understand the nickname you picked up is the padlock priest as a result of an incident that occurred in Toronto where you and two other members of the clergy padlocked yourself to the gate leading to the Morgentaler Clinic. For what reason? Were you hoping to close it by physically chaining yourself to the gate? Was it a form of protest?
Yeah. But may I just correct you a little bit, Carl? We didn't padlock ourselves to the gate. We padlocked the gate. I mean, we didn't padlock. I just want to make that one clear. That might be too dramatic.
You were charged, though, as a result?
Mischief.
Public mischief.
Yes. The last time I was charged with mischief was my mother, who is now over 50 years dead.
And this time you escaped much more lightly than I think you would have with your mother. The charges were dismissed, were they not, by the court?
The first charges were dismissed, yes. Yes. My mother didn't dismiss. She had her left like Muhammad Ali, so I think...
Father, breaking the law. In fact, no matter how much of a misdemeanor it was, you were breaking the law. And you're charging Henry Morgentaler, Dr. Morgentaler, with breaking the law. Yeah. You're doing the same thing. You're fighting fire with fire.
Oh, fire with fire. Putting a padlock on a gate, I can't say it's the same thing as murdering babies.
But it's the law. Whether the law, it's a matter of the severity of it. Of course, abortion is far more serious. And you're breaking the law, a man of God, a man of peace, breaking the law in order to make a point.
Am I allowed to ask you a question, Carl? If you were passing a swimming pool and there was a notice over it saying no trespassing, and you saw somebody with a baby by the feet drowning it, would you say, oh gee, I'd love to go in and help save that baby, but I can't because it's trespassing?
Mm-hmm. Your point is well made.
I can remember a meeting, as a matter of fact, that took place in my office with Father Lawrence Abello of the Jesuits, Father Al DeValk of the Basilian Fathers, and Father Ted Colleton of the Spiritans. And they figured that somebody had to be in jail in order that it would focus some attention. So it was decided by Father Abello that I should go to jail. And then the other two priests said, wait a minute, we need him doing all sorts of other things. So it was agreed that Father Colleton would go and lock the gate at Morgentaler's. Well, before that could happen, Father DeValk went and was saying the beads outside the abortuary, and he got arrested. So he was the first one to spend some time in the Don jail. And then Father Ted went to jail for about 6 weeks or so.
There was one funny thing happened. While he was in jail, my daughter Patricia was getting married, and he was to be co-celebrant at the Mass. So thank God he did make it out in time for the wedding. And we got great pleasure. from people he talked to in there. You know, I think he did a lot of good to a lot of the prisoners that were there.
Through all of the adversity he faced, Father Ted still managed to hold on to one of his brightest gifts, his humor and ability to laugh at himself.
Now, normally people of fierce vision like that tend to be humorless and bigoted. But Ted is the huge exception. Ted is a joker. Everywhere he goes, he has jokes, he has stories, he has card tricks, and he tells stories that laugh at himself. Very, very few people can do that.
Some years ago I was speaking in a big hall like this, and about halfway through, I've been speaking for about an hour, I thought I'd check up, and I said, "Can you hear me at the back?" A fellow stood up and said, "No, but it doesn't matter." And a lady in the front said, "I can hear him distinctly. Would you like to change places with me?"
I'll never forget the time a few years ago when he was honoured. I was president of the Irish Cultural Society at the time, and we had the President's Awards. And there's a dinner at which it's all a surprise. They don't know. He did not know he was being honoured that night. I think he suspected a little, but not really, because all the other Holy Ghost Fathers were there, so it could have been something to do with the group or what. Anyway, I told him before he went up on the stage, when he knew it was he, I said, "You have only 2 minutes, Father, 2 minutes to say a joke," because I said, "I know once you start, they'll all want you to go on. The Kerry men and the Cork men and the Dublin, they want to hear something about the..." But I said, I don't want to embarrass you by having to go up and say, "Father," because I said, there are lots of people coming after you and we haven't got the time. "No, okay, no problem, 2 minutes. Well, I had to embarrass him. I didn't embarrass him. Nothing would embarrass him. But I had to go up after about nearly 10 minutes, I'm sure. And the people were doubled up in the seats. I mean, they didn't want him to stop. They didn't care who was coming after him. That was a wonderful night. But he joked, he said, "I'm in trouble with the president. I'm in trouble with the president." Not at all.
There have been many celebrations along the way. His 50th and 60th anniversaries of his priesthood, his roast and 90th birthday cruise, attended by thousands of supporters.
My Uncle Edward, he gave his life to certain things. He gave his life to God. He gave his life to his fellow man. He gave his life to Africa. And he gave his life to Canada. And then he gave his life to the unborn. So he's given his life away to everybody.
He has been with us through extraordinarily good times and extraordinarily bad times. At the times of my life when I really had to put my shoulder to what seemed like a rock, Edward was there to support me. And at the times when I was able to gather life joyfully into my arms, he was also there to support me. He stood by me with his wonderful humanity and his great faith, and he always said to me, "Trish, keep the faith," and for that I thank him.
Well, I'm trying to look humble, but I've had very little practice.
He's been a dynamic worker. I can remember he's going to be 94 on July the 20th, 2007. And I can remember about 5 years ago, he said, "I'm just not doing enough." So here he was at age 89 saying, "Well, I don't have the same energy I had." And I said, "Well, how many hours did you work last week?" "Well, I don't know. I was on the road probably about 80 hours or 90 hours. I said, "So you don't have any energy, eh?"
When I was 18, my mother entered me in the Wexford Festival, for a musical festival. They picked all the future singing stars of Ireland. And I sang Danny Boyd, the Rose of Tralee, and Mother McCree, and John McCormick, the great Irish tenor, was on the selection committee. And he came over after me, put his arm around, he said, son, he said, it takes 100 qualities to make a world-class singer, and you've got 99 of them. I said, "Gee, that's wonderfully encouraging. What's the one I don't have?" He said, "A voice."
Now, after 67 years in the mission fields of Africa and North America, he's decided to retire at age 94. The Lion in Winter, as writer Grace Petrasek referred to him in her book Silhouettes Against the Snow, is preparing to spend the rest of his years in prayer, at home, in his beloved Ireland.
I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you. When Father first presented us with the fact that he wanted to go home to Ireland to retire, it took us all aback. We said, you've been away for 67 years. You're not going to know anybody when you get back. You know all of us. Why don't you stay here? He said, no, I'm being treated really well by the Christian brothers, a very prayerful group. But he said, I want to die with me own. And so with that, I had several conversations with the Spiritans, and we agreed that in his best interest, if that's what he wanted to do, they would make arrangements for him to retire to Kimmage Manor.
I won't say any more, except I'm very grateful and slightly embarrassed, but pleased with all the wonderful things that have been said about me. Sometimes I found it hard to recognize who the guy was that was talking. So, Baraki ya Mungu Baba, na Mwana, na Roho Mtakatifu, Ijaitu Yenu, na Ikai, Impaka Malele. That's the Kiswahili for, may the blessing of Almighty God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit go down upon all of you and remain forever. That's the best wish I can give you.
And that's why Ted is so very, very special to the Spiritans. He has contributed enormously to the Spiritans in his 36 or 37 years here. And we're going to miss him as he goes back to Ireland, which he will if the doctors allow it, and if the facilities are available in Kimmage, he'll go home. And the circle will be completed. Life will have come full circle, and Ted will have achieved what so many Irishmen have within their hearts and dream of. And the song says it so well. I don't have a voice, but I'm still going to sing it. Someday maybe I'll go back to Ireland. It may be at the closing of my day, just to see the moonlight shine on over Claddagh, and to watch the sun go down on Galway Bay.
They're going to lose a lot. They're going to lose a great person. But I think he'll try and keep on working. I'll definitely go to see him in Kimmage when I go to Ireland for my holiday. I'll maybe bring him up some pancakes.
Wonderful.
In case they don't feed him there properly.
For my 50th, I wrote a book, and some of you may have read it, called I Do It, Yes, I Do It Again. And at the last page, I wrote what, to me, was a summary of what my priesthood had meant to me. And I decided, well, after 10 years, if they did read the darn book, they won't remember it anyway. So I think the best thing is this is the last page in that book, and it applies exactly today as it did then. On June the 23rd, I celebrated my 60th year as a priest. It has been a great life, full of action, excitement, triumphs and failures, laughter and tears, sunshine and shadows. But I cannot think of any aspect of it which I would substantially change, and certainly not my priesthood. For 60 years I have stood at the altar of God and offered the holy sacrifice of the Mass, raised my hand in absolution over more repentant sinners than I could ever count, poured the waters of baptism over the heads of babies without number, preached the gospel in Ireland, England, Africa, the United States and Canada, and anointed the foreheads of those who were within minutes of meeting God face to face. And through the teaching of the Church, I know that in spite of my unworthiness, all these actions were not only valid, but fruitful. And although I was only the instrument of the Church, it is consoling to realize in the evening of life that I was chosen to be such an instrument. In this period of Church history, when the glory of the priesthood has been somewhat overshadowed by clouds of scandal and doubt, I want to affirm this fact. If I had another life to live, I'd do it again. There's a spot in my heart that no Colleen may own. There's a depth in my soul never sounded unknown. There's a place in my memory, in my life that you fill. No other could share it, no one ever will. Sure, I love the dear silver that shines in your hair, and the brow that's all furrowed and wrinkled with care. I kiss the dear fingers so tired, worn for me. Oh, God bless you and keep you, Mother Machree.
It's a very sad thing to consider life in Canada, and especially in the pro-life movement, without Father Ted Colleton.
He is a mark. You know, he's done so much, he's suffered so much, and he stands by everything.
I think it's very sad thinking that he's going to be gone. Back to Ireland. And nice for him, because that's where he was born and raised, and I suppose that's where I would want to be. But we'll miss him.
I know that he feels that we won't miss him, but I know that we'll miss him desperately. And those people that travel back and forth to Ireland on a regular basis will have the benefit of being able to go and visit with him, and so that connection to Canada will remain strong, I'm sure.
Every sorrow or care in the dear days gone by was made bright by the light of the smile in your eye. Like a candle that's set in a window at night, your fond love has cheered me and guided me right. Sure, I love the dear silver that shines in your hair, and the brow that's all furrowed and wrinkled with care. I kiss the dear fingers so tired, worn for me. Oh, God bless you and keep you, Mother Machree.
My dad often would make us a big breakfast on Sundays after Mass, and he would leave the grease in the pan. And we would always question, well, why are you leaving the grease from the bacon in the pan? And
he said, is that bacon grease there? And I said, yeah. He said, throw a couple of slices of bread into that and turn up the heat. I said, what? He said, yeah, I used to eat that back home in Ireland. So I made it for him. And
I don't know what it was. I just like pancakes.
You like pancakes?
And whatever way I made them, he seemed to have liked them.
So he would phone you and tell you that
he phoned me, I'm on my way up, whip up a few pancakes.
And then I'd say to him something like, well, how old was Lochinvar when he died? And he'd say, what? How did you know the name of me horse? I said, well, I read your books and Lochinvar is in there.
But we'll miss him. Did you do that on purpose?
Now just take a look at the top card there. Look at the top one. Yeah. Okay. Okay, put it back. Put it back, okay. Now what was it? What card was it? That was a Queen of Hearts. It wasn't. Absolutely, it was a Queen of Hearts. Yeah, that was a Queen of Hearts. It was the Ace of Hearts. No, it was a Queen of Hearts. Look at it again. Well, somehow the Queen left us. And guess who we have? There's the Ace. There's the Queen. And there's the Queen on the other side. Did you get that?